Hey, hi everyone. Today we're going to have a understanding on Flask. So what we are basically going to do is we'll try to understand what is Flask, and then we'll go ahead and create a small application in the Flask. But before we touch into the touch base on the Flask, let's try to understand what are the concepts around the Flask, right? Why do we need it in the first place, and what are the alternates which is available? So we are going to have a deep dive onto it before we actually go back and start writing code in the Flask, or basically in Python itself. Okay, so before we start with the Flask, let's try to understand a bit on the internet. Now, what do we need to know about the internet in general? So we'll try to understand a few facts about the internet first, and then we'll kind of understand about the write the code and start developing the application in the general. So before we understand, before anything else, let's look into the internet. When the internet started, right, almost around three decades back, the whole idea was to make the information available to the people around the world. And for that region, we had a lot of couple of things which were already being there. So we started with the web 1.0 version. Now web 1.0 was basically about having a static file altogether. The files that you see, it was just that you open a website, and post opening the website you can see the content of the file. You cannot interact with the content of the file, you cannot do a lot of things with the file. So that was the very first version of the web. Now over the period of time, people realize that we need to do a lot of things with the web, which means, hey, we want to interact with the website, like for example creation of your account, or change your profile picture, or various things around it. And that's why they realize that web 1.0, which is just about a read activity, it needs to change, and hence it came across with web 2.0. Now web 2.0 was a major update. Why? Because now people will be able to interact with it. People can do multiple things, and when I say multiple things, they can create some information. For example, hey, I want to create my account on Facebook, I want to create an account on Instagram, right? So you are basically creating some new sort of the data. Then you had a read, which means I can see the data pointers, whatever I have added or things around the world, I can read those content. This was something which was already present in Web 1.0 already. Then we want to update, right? So let's say I added my email address, or I added my address, and I want to update my address or a phone number. And that is what you are basically doing, an update operation. Or let's say you want to basically delete your information as well. So these were the very basic things that we wanted to do across, in order to make sure that, hey, my website looks a very dynamic in nature. Otherwise it would be a very static website altogether, which means you go there and just read the information. So in order to make the website dynamic in nature, we wanted to perform these four activities. In short, we say, hey, can your website perform a CRUD operation or not? And this was a very big basic thing. So when a person says, hey, can your website perform a CRUD operation, they are basically referring to create, read, update, or the delete operation on your website. So let's just start looking into a bit more on this. And for that, we now need to understand internet a bit more here. Okay, so how does the internet basically work, or how does the website basically work? Right, I'm not going into any DNS kind of an activity, but yeah, we'll look forward to it. So let's say you actually went to your browser and you open google.com. This is a classic thing. When we try to open our website, we open google.com or xyz, whatever. So let's say this is you, and you open the browser and you tabbed google.com. The information from your browser basically goes to a server, and this is where we call it as a Google server. The information goes to the Google server. The Google server basically processes your information, and then, and who processes the information, by the way? The website code that you have written. So for example, if a person wants to add any information, they send those information. Let's say I want to update my password. So I send this information through my browser that, hey, I want to update my password. This information goes to the Google server. The Google server basically write down and does all the operation, whatever it has to do. We'll look forward to this operation in some time. Post this operation has done, the Google basically send you a response back. So this request that you are sending from your browser to the Google server, we are basically calling it as an HTTP request. And the response that you are getting, we call it as an HTTP response. So these are the two things that you get: HTTP request and HTTP response. Now that we have kind of have obtained the request and the response in general, this request and response will also have multiple types. Why multiple times? Because the type of request that you are sending, it can vary. Sometimes I can send a delete operation. Sometimes I can send an update information. Sometimes I can send, hey, I just want to read the information altogether, right? So you are sending a different types of information. So obviously based upon the CRUD operation that we look forward to. So the four types of information that you are basically looking forward to are the get operation. Now when I say get request, it means it's a read operation mostly that you are using, right? Then we have a post operation, right? This is where you are basically creating it in the information, right? You have a put, it is an update, and then you have a delete operation. Now remember, there are a lot of other types of request type is also there, but I'm covering the four basic type which is required for it. The delete operation. So these are the four operations basically we usually perform on the internet. So whenever you send any request, out of the four requests, one of the requests can actually happen, right? Let's look into it, right? If you don't believe me, let's kind of look into this part. So let's say I opened google.com, right? I'll just open a google.com. I'll do the right click, go to inspect element, and probably from there you go to a network tab. You reload the page once again, and you see a lot of requests is basically being sent across, right? Like a search request, multiple things are there. I'll try to take a pretty basic website, okay, instead of google.com, because a lot of other informations are also being attached to it. Let's try to look across for a very simple website. Example, bartman.ai. Now you see, the moment I open this particular website, the bartman.ai, I mean, it will take some time. Okay, so as you can see, it took some time, right? And then I'm basically getting a very basic website being upfront there. So when you basically look into the multiple information that is basically being featured, you can go to a header tab here, and you can see what a request is basically being sent across. And this is the same thing with every other website. You can go to a network tab, and you can see when you open this website on your browser, the browser basically send all these information to the server, and everything is of a different type. So you see, where did the browser send the information? The browser sent the information to bartman.ai/api/projects/featured. You actually open bartman.ai, but behind the scene, browser is doing a lot of information. So we do a lot of debugging through the network tab in order to identify where my informations are basically going to which server. Because UI can be receiving a lot of information can go through behind the scene. Similarly, I can open another one, and you see there's a Google Analytics being run through it as well, which means Google Analytics is somehow integrated in this website, which is also tracking you up. Right. Now you see there's another request which went through, which is slash API slash auth user. This is get, but it returned with a status code. I'll come back to the status code in a while. But you see, it shows red. Red obviously means it's something is wrong, right? We'll talk about this in some time. Now closely observe, this is green, which means it worked, right? 200, okay. So 200 and 401, remember the, numbers. We'll talk about this in some time. So as you can see, there's a get request, there's a, the get request which is there, right? So multiple requests are basically being, put across. Okay, so let's go back and, try to, continue our discussion. Okay, so as you can see that we are basically, the browser is sending all these requests. Similarly, it will send a post request, put request, a delete request for various things. So when you send a request, so web server, the Google server here at this point, will see what kind of a request that it has received, right? And then based upon the request, it will start processing out the information. Process out the information, take the right action, then respond you back with a step response. Now, step response is not like we have types there, but step response is basically a simple response that a client has sent to the server, right? Okay, so we got the request and responses. Now, apart from the response that you get, there is something called as a status code. So every response that is received to you is associated with some sort of an status code. It has 1xx, which means 100, 101, something like that. 2xx, 200, 201, something like that. 3xx, right? 4xx, 5xx, different, Now, how do we know about these status codes? Because these status codes are a standard one which is already being set. And every single website on the internet has to follow these status code as well. And every status code has a meaning. But with the help of this, they deduce what kind of a problem is happening on the website. Is it working fine? Is it not working fine? So we look forward to these status code, all together. So you can actually look forward to these status code from the official, so you can just search for HTTP status code and, so HTTP status code, and you can just look forward to this Mozilla, right? And you'll be able to find out the information. So as I mentioned, informational responses between 100 to 199, successful responses between 200 to 299, and hence I was specifying 2xx. xx here can vary from 00 to 99. Redirection message, some client service error, right? So if you get a 404 error, which means there is a client, the problem is on the client side. If it's a server error, right, 501, which means the problem is on the server side. So based upon the response code, you'll be able to realize that what kind of problem is happening. Now, when the internet is not there, you must have seen there's a 404 error comes down and a nice looking game comes down on your browser if you're actually playing it on the Chrome itself, which shows that the problem is on the client side. And who is the client? Client is the browser. So if you don't have an internet, which is your problem, and hence, you get a 404 error, right? Similarly, if the problem is on the Google server, you'll get something on the error response as a 500, 501, or something like that. You can look forward to different, error code. What are the, code that it basically, comes down? 200 that we just saw now is an okay, right? If you remember, we saw a 401 error as well, which is unauthorized. A 400 is a bad request. 404 is not found. So multiple things which you look forward to, which you can look forward to. What are the different kinds of error which is available, and stuff like that, right? Anyway, so these are the different kinds of error, and status code basically helps us in debugging this sort of the error. Now, moving ahead with our same discussion on the error code. These are the very basic system through which you will be able to analyze that how my internet, how my website is working. On the website side, as I mentioned, all this code and everything has to gather based upon the request that you are getting, and from there you start processing out the information. Now remember, this is web 2.0 I'm talking in terms. Now we have also moved across to web 3.0, and here we are talking about a decentralization. Now that is something which involves blockchain and multiple things around it. It's fairly new. People are still figuring out a way to integrate web 3.0, and stuff like that. But for our discussion, we'll not look forward to it. If anyone is highly motivated, you guys can do a simple Google out with the web 3.0, and you will be able to understand it. Okay, so where does Flask fit in into the entire scenario? Now you see, the server that I'm talking about, right? This is where the Flask come into play. Now why a Flask, right? Why? Okay, let's look into that, and then we'll go into the coding side as well. So why a Flask in the first place? So far we have gone through Python. We have seen through Python. We know Python as one of the language. We have JavaScript as another language. You have Java, the language, and different languages altogether. So the languages are very pretty nice in order to do the coding. Some of them are nice to make application and for different amount of things altogether. Python is pretty beginner friendly, and if you look across with Python, Python is used by probably all sort of the engineer as well, and it's pretty much easier to learn than the other languages like JavaScript, Java, and stuff like that. So when we talk in terms of the Python, right? So Python, through with the help of the Python, you can actually start creating applications. You can start writing automation script and stuff like that. So before web started, it was Java which was basically ruling the world. So it was all the websites and everything was being created with Java. And then one fine morning, during it was kind of an April Fool's joke, one the developer decided to create a library called as Flask. Because to create an application in Java, you had to write hundreds and hundred lines of code just to start off a server itself. So they realized that hey, we need something which should be light. So as an April Fool joke, he created something called as a Flask as a library, which was a simple Python library. And you just install this Flask as a library, and then you start writing code on top of it, and with just few line of code you can start creating your own website. And it was just to troll the people coming from the Java. That was the whole idea. But people saw it is a quick way to create website. It was pretty nice idea because it was already a library, full-fledged library, easy to create, bundle across with a inbuilt server. You don't have to do anything across. You just have to follow a few things, and then hey, we are done with that. Okay, so we started with that, and people started writing out started using Flask. But remember, Flask is quick. It's used for the dev purpose, but if you are or probably for an MVP. But if you are going for a full-fledged application, then probably Flask is not the right choice for it. In that situation, you can go with a full-on web framework called as a Django, right? But this is more for a web developer. If you want to become a web developer, then probably you might be looking across. My discussion right now is for general people who wants to understand the mindset of a developer, right? So this Flask is not going to cut a deal that hey, after learning Flask you can become a developer, but you can at least understand the mindset of a developer, because ultimately even when you go to a Django, even when you go to a JavaScript and everything, the concept is going to be the same. The language, the framework might change, probably a way might change, but the thought process that you are writing the code is still going to be the same. So that's what we are basically going to do across, and we are going to basically work towards it. Okay, so now once we have, you know, uh, completely done this, we can simply go and start, install the Python, install the Flask in your library, Flask as a library, and then you can quickly start off it. So that's the story of Flask, right? So in the Flask, we'll see, like, how we are basically getting started with the get request, post request, put, delete, all sort of the request all together, and we'll basically look forward to it. So in the next video, we'll start by from here onwards, but while writing our first Flask code and looking forward to it. So that's all for this video one. Watch the video 2 on the continuation of the Flask. This is the Flask series that I'm starting off with for people who have no freaking idea about the, how to start as a developer, or are basically starting off, right? This is probably the video if you are coming from a DevOps in the cloud engineer, or any sort of the things. This is going to be the situation that you want to learn.